So, you think an aborted takeoff is super easy? Well, you know what? I thought so. I thought it was a total joke when I went through training. How easy is it to just pull power back and stop on 3,000, 4,000 feet of remaining runway in front of you when you're with your CFI? So my CFI reaches over and pulls the power back on the takeoff roll. I come to a stop. That's super easy. What's so difficult about an aborted takeoff? Well, obviously, there's a little bit more that goes into it. We're going to look at that. Why did this aborted takeoff go so wrong? What caused the pilot and the front seat passenger to break their backs and the backseat passenger to be fatally injured? What decisions were made that led up to this scenario? How did a relatively routine takeoff go so wrong in an airplane that had just flown recently before? This is one of those times where we don't want to nitpick and armchair quarterback another pilot or try to throw him under the bus, and that's not what we're doing here. But bottom line is, some decisions were made that weren't so good. Some decisions were made that were just kind of downright stupid. And I'll be the first to admit, with thousands of hours of flying, 10 years flying now, that I could make these same decisions. I could fall into these same traps that this pilot did. If you think that aborted takeoffs are easy and that you would never do something this dumb, then quit watching this video. Check out your subscription feed. I'm sure there's others in there that are better. But if you realize that even as an experienced pilot, you can neglect a few things on your pre-flight check. You can neglect a few things on the takeoff roll, and you can get into a situation like this and you don't want to, then keep watching. We'll spend the next 10 minutes looking at what happened here, trying to figure out why what looks like a routine takeoff with 3 people in a 4-seat airplane went so wrong. And quite frankly, it was destined to go wrong from the beginning. We're going to work backwards with this question. When was it clear that this airplane was going to crash? Obviously here, it's pretty obvious. Was it obvious that it was going to crash here? Yeah. I mean, to us, I think so. Was it obvious here? Well, that's about the time the pilot realized, yeah, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to clear the fence. I'm not going to clear this berm. He reduced power and he accepted the crash. Probably with a lot of regret and a lot of very nasty stomach-churning feelings at this point, realizing that he just wrecked his airplane and he just hurt 2 of his friends really bad and himself, most likely. But why, just seconds before that, not even seconds, a second or 2, was he trying to fly the airplane? Was it obvious the airplane was going to crash here? Well, it was obvious that at this point, it had 2 options. Crash, overrun the runway and break the airplane, or try to fly. So he made a decision. Try to fly the airplane. Should he have made this decision sooner? What was the performance data on this airplane? He was on a 2,000-foot long runway. Sounds good enough, but what does this airplane actually need to take off? Well, according to the book, only 1350. So that's good. So we checked the book. It said 1350. Of course, that's with a good running engine. So 1350, we should be off the ground with about 700 feet almost of runway remaining. But they weren't. They were still on the ground at the end of the runway. What's the rule that we know as pilots that we're supposed to know about when to abort a takeoff? Well, when you think the airplane's not going to fly, when you're nervous about it, when it doesn't seem right, when your gut tells you to? What rule does the FAA have? What's the 50-70 rule? What does that mean to us? The 50-70 rule that the FAA has, that applies to really any general aviation airplane on any runway surface, is achieve 70% of your rotation speed 50% of the way down the runway or abort the takeoff. 50% of the way down the runway, you make a decision, continue the takeoff or stop. Did he follow that rule? I don't know, and quite frankly, I disagree with the FAA. I'm going to call BS on that rule. I think it's a useless rule for general aviation. I think for your average general aviation pilot, it's a terrible rule to follow. That it will only lead to more accidents if you actually try to do that. Try to do that crazy math in your head. I make it a little simpler and try to give myself a little bit more cushion for what we're doing here. 50% of the way down the runway, achieve rotation speed. Be at a point where your airplane is ready to fly. How do you know? Because you've achieved a speed at which the airplane will fly, rotation speed or better, by 50% of the way down the runway. Airspeed is still increasing. You see that needle trend moving, or on your glass cockpit, you see that trend vector showing increasing airspeed. You check your gauges, everything looks good, good RPM, everything's in the green. And in your butt and in your back and in those fingertips, you feel the aircraft is ready to fly. 3 criteria: airspeed, engines or instruments, and the feeling of the aircraft being ready to fly. If any of those 3 criteria are not met and you're halfway down the runway, it's an immediate powered idle. Apply the brakes, maybe retract flaps, do whatever it takes to get the airplane stopped and maintain directional control. It doesn't have to be complicated. 70% of rotation speed, what's rotation speed? What's this? Just, if you're halfway down your runway and the airplane's not in the air, keep it on the ground, stop and figure out why. And you can say, well, but John, I use the FAA's rule because it gives me a little more utility in my airplane. It's not as conservative, but why do I have to be so conservative? I mean, the book says 1350 and I'm on a 2,000 foot long runway. That's plenty. You're telling me basically that I need to, if the book says 1350, I need a 2,700 foot long runway. That's excessive. Okay. Yeah, sure. Well, you want to take off and land short. I get it. I think, we know something about that, right? We have some other videos where we take off and land short in airplanes. I've taken off in an airplane and landed and done all that in under 200 feet. 72 foot takeoff, 108 foot landing. Yeah, we know something about that. We're also doing that at a STOL competition on an 1,800 foot long runway with tons of space at the end before we get to any sort of obstacle. Okay, what about when you're in the backcountry? You're flying on short strips? Sure, like here, 500 foot long strip. Not a lot of room for error, right? But guess what? I only need 200 feet or less to be in the air. If I'm not in the air by 200 feet, guess what? Power comes to idle immediately, not even 50% of the way down the runway. I got 300 feet to still stop. And then when I do rotate at 200 and I'm off, guess what? I have no obstacles. I have some obstacles I have to turn around, but nothing I have to climb and clear. So even in the backcountry, even when you watch these YouTube videos of guys taking off and landing super short, there's a lot of safety factors, a lot of safety margin still built in that might not be obvious. I understand you want to get the most utility out of your aircraft and you have a 4-seat airplane that goes super fast. You want to load 3 other people in there. Probably not the best idea. So let's rewind a little bit more. We're halfway down the runway. Should we have stopped? Yeah. Could we have stopped? Oh yeah. 1,000 feet to get this airplane stopped? For sure. Check the POH. You can get it stopped in 1,000 feet. Wouldn't even go off the end of the runway. Wouldn't have even hit the grass. Why didn't he make the decision to stop? And rewind a little bit more. When was it first obvious for the pilot, or when should it have been obvious that this airplane was going to crash or not perform as expected? Right when he set power. Sound spectrum analysis from the NTSB on this video says the RPM was 2430, 2430 RPM. Takeoff RPM is 2700. Right from the get-go, he was 270 RPM short. The magnetos weren't timed correctly. Pilots don't know that. We're not supposed to know that. You don't need to know things about magneto timing and really intense mechanical things to be a pilot. What you do need to know is your minimum RPM for takeoff. And if you don't achieve it, you don't need to know why the engine's not doing it. You just need to know it's not okay to go fly. And you need to not try to go fly. If you don't have the right numbers, if you don't have 2,700 RPM or minimum RPM from the POH, from the TCDS for that airplane, you abort right from the get-go. Now, in addition to that, you would have done a weight and balance on this airplane, right? Of course. And actually this pilot did. He did a weight and balance. He figured it all on his iPad. And he said, yeah, I'm actually a little bit under gross weight. So this should work. Little error there. Where'd you get your empty weight from, man? I Googled it. You Googled your empty weight on your airplane. You typed in your tail number and found that empty weight. Or is there anywhere inside the aircraft you might have looked for the weight and balance data? Anything we recite on private pilot check rides a lot, like Aero, like the weight and balance data is contained in the aircraft and in the aircraft maintenance logbooks. You think maybe that number would have been a little more specific to your aircraft? Maybe the empty weight you used was 141 pounds lighter than your aircraft actually was, and you were 78 pounds over gross weight when you attempted this takeoff? So, some errors made? Yeah. Don't use empty weights on Google. You can say, oh, I would never do that. Don't try to take off when your RPM's below what it's supposed to be. You'd say, oh, I won't do that. Do you even know what the minimum RPM is for your airplane? Might want to check. Might be a good number to know. Don't go past halfway down the runway and still be on the ground. Well, I have a short runway, so that's normal at my airport. Why are you operating there? Why couldn't you have just had your passengers drive 10 miles away and pick them up at the airport with the 8,000 foot long runway? Hate to say it, it's not like it's a good thing, but even with this airplane being overweight and the engine not producing full power, there probably would not have been an accident if they had used an 8,000 foot long runway instead of a 2,000 foot long one. There's some safety margin built into these airplanes that we must absolutely positively never try to take advantage of or exploit. You stick to the numbers and give yourself some room for error there. Never proceed past halfway down the runway and not be in the air. Never try to force the airplane off, but never go past halfway. Never let your abort point be more than halfway. And if you're saying, well, this runway that I want to land at or operate at is too short, well then unload your airplane. Make it lighter, make it perform so that you're off within halfway, that you can easily accelerate to flying speed and still reduce power and abort and come to a complete stop. This accident was 100% pilot error. There's no way about it. You can say, oh, well, he had mechanical trouble and, the math didn't quite add up. That's all on us as pilots. 91.7, you're the ultimate authority to the safe operation of flight. You're the ultimate authority to decide that this airplane is airworthy. You need to know just enough about maintenance to know that your engine is healthy and producing good power. You need to know just enough that, well, the numbers on Google might not be the right numbers for your specific airplane. And you need to be operating with enough room for error that when things do go wrong and you do make a dumb mistake like Google your empty weight, that it doesn't come to bite you or kill your friend that's sitting behind you. Other things that were factors in this accident that the NTSB identified. The two front seaters broke their backs. They had shoulder harnesses on. The back seater died. He had a lap belt on. He elected not to use his shoulder harness that was actually there. Also, what they cited was the fact that the headrests were removed from the aircraft. That might have saved his life. The airplane was built with headrests. You might want to keep those headrests in your airplane if it came with it, or possibly get them installed if there's an STC available for it. This airplane was going to crash right from the get-go. As soon as he applied full power and released the brakes, and the engine wasn't producing full power, it was going to crash. It wasn't guaranteed to crash. They weren't guaranteed to get hurt until somewhere around here. He still could have accepted that he made a mistake and damaged the aircraft and they could have walked away. But trying to salvage it, trying not to embarrass yourself, trying not to let your ego get hurt, trying to not let your friends down, trying to make it happen, makes the situation worse. Why was he in this situation in the first place? Why are you in a 4-seat airplane with 3 pretty big guys, all over 200 pounds, a good chunk of fuel, and 120 pounds of baggage? Could your friends not have just driven 10 miles to another airport and flown off the 8,000 foot long runway? Well, they'd say, oh God, that's a 45-minute drive in this traffic. So you don't want to let them down. You feel that pressure. Maybe you say, oh yeah, you and Bill, you guys want to go golfing? Yeah, we can take my plane. It's awesome, and you talk it up. Who of us hasn't said to someone in conversation, oh yeah, we could go flying later on, or to a coworker, to a neighbor. Sure, let's go flying. Let's go grab a $100 hamburger. Let's go golfing over here. You make that promise, you open your mouth. Oh, sure, we'll take your kids flying. And then you realize, oh man, me and him and 2 kids. Man, my 172, it's pretty hot out. I don't know if that's gonna work so good, but you feel pressure because you talked yourself into it. Or what happens when somebody says, you're a pilot, you can fly us. I don't wanna drive 6 hours, we could fly it in an hour. Your airplane can do it, right, Bill? Sure it can, yeah. And you feel pressure, you don't want to let them down. Your ego, your self-esteem, your self-image. Do you really have what it takes in you to say, no, actually I can't do that. My airplane, oh yeah, you have 4 seats, right? Yeah, but it doesn't really carry 4 people. What do you mean? Come on, you have 4 seats? We can all fit in there, you call me fat? And it's really hard and difficult to tiptoe around that and say, well, look, it just doesn't have the performance numbers for it. It's got 4 seats, but that engine just isn't that strong. It's an old airplane. It's a 1960, 1970, whatever. I don't feel comfortable with it. It doesn't meet my personal standards I've set for myself as a pilot to make sure I have an adequate safety margin. And now you sound like a jerk. Now your neighbor, your coworker, whoever's kind of mad at you, annoyed, thinks you're a crappy pilot. Do you have enough self-esteem and self-worth to be able to say those things? To be able to own it and stick to it and not budge? You have to stand for something, otherwise you'll fall for anything, as the saying goes. Stand for what you know works. Stand for your personal minimums, stand for safety, and explain to them in a calm, clear voice. Look, this is how I keep myself and my passengers safe. My airplane isn't actually that fast. It can't get in and out of that strip. I know somebody else can, but my airplane can't. And they won't understand if they're not pilots. Or the worst is when your neighbor, who was a private pilot 20 years ago, says, oh yeah, you can fly us in that Mooney and we'll load up the golf clubs and do all this stuff. Yeah, it can do it. You totally can. You go, no, I really can't. Actually, no, that's going to be a little overweight. Oh, come on, overweight. It's fine. A few pounds doesn't matter. You're going to have enough self-esteem, enough self-worth, enough confidence in your own abilities to stand up for what you know works. You're the pilot. You're it. You're the pilot in command, the ultimate authority for the safety of that flight. You have to be confident in your abilities. You have to understand the limitations of your aircraft, the limitations of yourself, your own personal abilities. And you have to be okay with that. And you have to let others be okay with it too. And if they're not, you might lose some friends over it. Actually, you might make some people upset. It's a tough situation to be in. But this situation is a lot tougher. And it's a lot tougher after the fact too if you actually live through it. As pilots, we have to be willing to stand up to our passengers, to our husbands, wives, girlfriends, kids, neighbors, coworkers. We have to be willing to stand up to ATC. We have to do what it takes to maintain the safety of flight for us and our passengers and everyone around us. Now, if you got into aviation to try to make friends, impress people, boast about it, tell everyone that you're a pilot and how cool you are, this probably isn't the hobby for you. If you're trying to do this to make yourself feel better about yourself, to build up your own ego, this is going to end terribly for you. Aviation demands humility. These accidents can happen to anyone. The decisions, the thoughts, and the situations, the external pressures that lead up to this are felt by everyone. In aviation and in everyday life, we feel these external pressures. Being able to communicate with people about your own skill and ability and about the abilities of an aircraft you own or rent is crucial. It's required. It's demanded of you as a pilot. It's demanded of you as a human being in everyday life to not promise more than you can give, to not write checks you can't cover. Aviation will uncover any weaknesses. When you talk about something, make promises that you can't keep, you will be found out. And sometimes, cases like these, in the worst way. It's important to be able to communicate these things to our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, the people around us that think we're so cool because we're pilots and we can fly them places. And a lot of times we just can't. We can't get you there faster than driving. We can't go in this weather. We can't go on that airport. We can't go on that runway. We can't take that load. We can't take that many people. There's 4 seats, but we can only take 1 or 2. And if you communicate that to them, but more importantly, how you communicate it to them, if you explain it to them from a sense that you actually care and you genuinely care about their safety and yours, not just your own safety, not just your own self-image, not just how people think about you, but you genuinely care about their safety and that they're not going to be in an unsafe situation, that it's actually quicker for them to drive anyways. If you genuinely care, it'll show. They'll know. You won't lose friends. You won't make people upset. They might be a little bummed or disappointed. You cancel a flight because of weather. It's blue skies here, but it's not good en route. Blue skies here and blue skies the destination, but you know it's just not the right time to go. You have to be able to, from a confident standpoint, explain that to the people you fly with. Explain that to your passengers. Explain to ATC when you just simply can't do something. It's not about being good enough, having the right stuff. The right stuff is standing up for yourself, being confident in your own abilities, and knowing your limitations and the limitations of the aircraft. You might think that this was a low-time pilot that did this. This guy had 3,000 hours. He was rated in helicopters, seaplanes, had a lot of ratings, a lot of experience. 100 hours in the make and model. Enough time to hopefully know what a normal takeoff looks like, normal acceleration looks like. But those external pressures can play a big role. You can say, boy, it's sluggish, but we got 2 big guys in here and a bunch of stuff. Boy, the end of the runway's coming, but just keep throwing the coals to it. We'll get airborne. No, Realize that you're in a bad situation. If you open your mouth and you commit to something, yeah, both of us can go flying. All three of us can go, and we'll take the bags, the golf bags and all that stuff. Even if you fire up, taxi out to the runway, and you feel that feeling in the pit of your stomach, knowing this isn't good, turn around, taxi back to the hangar. Apologize. You miscalculated. It's not going to work. Maybe it's not going to work today. Maybe it'll work tomorrow. Maybe it won't work at all for your airplane. Maybe you got to make 2 trips. It's a lot better to be a little late making 2 trips or postpone a flight than to never arrive in the first place. This is something that can happen to any of us. That's the takeaway here. Slow things down. Realize how you can fall into these seemingly innocent traps. Oh, engine that's a little weak, being on a shorter runway, just trying to go a little bit more, load a little more weight. You already promised these guys. What are you going to do? You can't go to another airport. It's too far for them to drive. It's inconvenient. You're trying to impress somebody. You have to be confident in your own abilities. You have to have enough self-worth without aviation to be able to survive in aviation. That's the takeaway from this video. Slow it down. Think. Ask yourself, how is this accident report going to read? Are people going to think I was dumb for making this flight or trying to achieve it if things don't go perfectly right? That's what I want you guys to think about. If you have questions on this accident case, if you have questions on anything in general, the link is in the description below to fly@mikealpha.com. There's a button at the top of the website that says ask a question. Click on it. You'll be able to talk to one of our CFIs. Remember that this can happen to anybody. Remember that these promises we make to our friends lead to so many accidents when we don't know how to say no. Even at the last minute, even when you're at the hold short line, it's still okay to say no. Not until you're here is it too late. Think about that. Be safe out there, guys, and we'll see y'all in the next one.